it's just so hard to believe that version of Aaron Rodgers, that's the end. I mean, if it is, more power to him. But there's football left in that arm, and there's football left in those feet. We saw that today.
Mayfield, rolling, Evans, he's got it! He ties it! Jerry Rice has company!
Absolutely, that's one of the greatest things I've seen in a long time. The excitement, the joy, and obviously the thrill of victory for the team. But for Mike to do that, set a record that only one other receiver in history, greatest receiver of all time, Jerry Rice, has. Absolutely awesome.
Maybe your team made the postseason. Maybe you're celebrating a big victory Monday, but are you having as good of a day as Mike Evans, punching his ticket to the playoffs, matching Jerry Rice for 1,000-yard seasons, and earning $3 million to boot? Good to be Mike Evans on this Monday. Hi, welcome to the NFL on Fox podcast, presented by Verizon, the NFL powered by Verizon 5G. I am your host, Dave Helman, and the madness in Tampa is just one aspect of a picture-perfect final weekend of the regular season. Leave it to the NFL. You know they're going to find a way to make it good in ways you don't always expect. We had early drama. We had late drama. We had a game of the season, of the century, however you want to bill it. The wild card weekend is set. Really, at the end of the day, that's all I know. And things are going to be changing rapidly from here on out. We've got a playoff picture to consider. We've got a coaching carousel to watch out for. All of that happening over the next month. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves, because we finally know what these 2024 NFL playoffs are going to look like, and they look like a doozy. That is the focus of our Sunday Six on this final Sunday of the regular season. 14 teams have reached the postseason. We've got the matchups. We're going to get into it. That is what we have on deck for you in our Sunday Six, the six biggest storylines of Week 18, as we close the book on the regular season and turn our attention to the playoffs. And let's start. Where else could you start? Yes, we will get to Mike and the Bucs and everything that happened early on Sunday, and a wild AFC wild card race as well. But we got to start with the one that meant everything, the Week 18 finale of all finales. I'm, of course, talking about Vikings and Lions, the Detroit Lions with a huge win against Minnesota to lock up the number one seed in the NFC, the final matchup of the regular season. Maybe not as dramatic as you might have been hoping for, but I thought delivered on the goods anyway. Let's start off the Sunday Sixth with one of the biggest regular season games in NFL history. Of course, the Minnesota Vikings and the Detroit Lions at Ford Field. This is our Victory Unlocked. It's brought to you by Zillow. Agents, tours, loans, homes. The Lions with a huge home win. They beat the Minnesota Vikings 31-9 in a game that I will argue was much, much closer than the final score is going to indicate. I think people are going to try to act like the Lions ran away with this. Very much in doubt up until maybe late third quarter, early fourth, a much more competitive game than I think the final score indicates. But is the Lions who get the win and the number one seed and the bye and all of that good stuff. We talked about the stakes heading into the weekend. The Lions win the NFC North for the second straight year. They get a week off to get healthy and get ready for the divisional round. And the Minnesota Vikings, despite winning 14 games, will be a wild card. They will open the season on the road. But before we get into all of the playoff implications and all of that good stuff that's to come, let's talk about how we got here. And we're going to do it with a little bit of help. My buddy Greg Auman of foxsports.com was gracious enough to join me. And it is late over there in Eastern time, Greg. So I really appreciate you taking the time, man.
Of course. Glad to be on with you. And it's fun to have everything in play. I mean, this is everything we've been building up to. And now we got playoff games to talk about.
So I touched on this being a more competitive game than the final score looks, and the Lions did pull away. We can talk about all of the high-powered players on their offense. Jahmyr Gibbs had a career day, but I think for me, the conversation here, it has to begin and end with the job that Aaron Glenn and this Detroit defense did against Sam Darnold. And it's so fitting for the last 5-6 weeks. Really, it's been a theme going all the way back to Aiden Hutchinson getting hurt in week 6 was the Lions have just lost too many playmakers on defense. They're going to have to outscore people. They're going to have to win shootouts every single week. And Aaron Glenn holds the Vikings without a touchdown, flusters Sam Darnold into one of the worst performances of his season. I thought it was as good of a coaching job as we've seen all season, and Aaron Glenn got it at exactly the right time.
Remarkable. Like, I really liked Detroit going into this year. They were my Super Bowl pick in the NFC, and I kept kind of mentally writing them off with each injury. Hutch was the big one, but they've lost a lot. And even tonight, they lost Terry Arnold halfway through the game. And I'm thinking like, wow, lose your top rookie corner against a really good passing offense. And they never really got to take advantage of it. They moved guys around. They pressured them more. I thought the key to the game was just all those early stops in the red zone. And Darnold went like 0 for 7 inside the 10 to start the game. Just incompletion after incompletion. And, held them without a point and then field goal and then field goal. And that gave him the early distance. And then the offense kind of clicked. And like you said, kind of pulled away there with Gibbs scoring so many touchdowns.
It felt like Glenn he just felt the rhythm of this game so well. I mean, he knew when to blitz. He knew when to show blitz and back off. Lions blitzed Sam Darnold on 56% of his dropbacks in this game. And when they weren't blitzing, they were also winning with man coverage. You mentioned the red zone. There was a great sequence there on one of the Vikings turnover on downs in the red zone, because they had multiple, where the Lions sent the house at Darnold twice on early downs. And then on the money down, they show blitz, they back off. Darnold looks for Jordan Addison on the crosser, and Terry and Arnold, before he got hurt, the coverage was there. Like I said, it just felt like he knew when to push every button at the exact right time. They only sacked Darnold twice in this game, which is not a crazy amount at all. But if you watched it, you just know he never felt comfortable. It never felt like he felt good about what he was looking at. It was the way they were able to change the picture on him. I can't say enough about how impressive it was.
Yeah, I mean, this should be, I felt like this was two of the best defensive coordinators in the NFL this year in Aaron Glenn and Brian Flores. Both just outstanding. National Assistant Coach of the Year candidate type things. And one of them really stepped up and shut down, again, two really good offenses too. But again, the way the Lions kept them in check, they didn't look like two teams that had the same record going into the night. And the difference is huge. I mean, it's amazing to think about how much is on the line in this game. And the two teams with the same record, one of them gets the week off and gets to host a divisional game. The other one has to go on the road across the country and go to that team's to set up this rematch in 2 weeks, probably.
I do want to say this, and I've touched on it, but it is wild. It's rare where you see a game with a final score this lopsided, where I really feel like the Vikings were 3 plays away from this being a much different night, maybe 3-4 plays. You mentioned it. Darnold finished 2 of 11 for 7 yards in the red zone. Minnesota got down there 4 times. They come away with no touchdowns, 2 field goals, and 2 turnover on downs. If a couple of those money plays go a different way, you're talking about a completely different game. And then for me, this is, if I had to pick a play where it really felt like things swung, Andrew Van Ginkel also had a chance at a pick 6 in this game, and he drops it, which is, I mean, it's cruel anyway, but when this is a guy that's done it multiple times this season, you know he can make those sorts of plays. If he gets it, it cuts it to, it was 17-9 at the time. That cuts it to potentially a tie game or at least a 1 or 2 point game. He drops it, and then a handful of plays later, Jahmyr Gibbs is celebrating in the end zone. Even as late as the early fourth quarter, it felt like Minnesota still had a chance here, and it just felt like they didn't make any of those big inflection plays in this game.
Yeah, I felt like the key for Minnesota this year has just been that their front office hit on every free agent signing, from Darnold, obviously being who he's been, to Van Ginkel and Grenard. And those guys didn't have great games. And those are kind of a big part of the problem for why they didn't win this game is is missed opportunities. And like you said, Darnold in the red zone and dropping a pick six. They've counted on their newcomers and their free agents to lead this team, and they just didn't do it tonight. And Detroit, at the same time, Detroit, kind of this homegrown team that has so many young players and draft picks and guys like Gibbs and Campbell and Branch and these second-year guys, they're really stepping up well. They won it. I mean, they got it done tonight.
I want to try this take out, and you tell me how you feel about it. It sounds, maybe it sounds silly, because look, the Kansas City Chiefs rested their starters. They had the number 1 seed in the AFC locked up a week ahead of time. They are in prime position to three-peat. And if they do, that's obviously what we're going to remember, is this unprecedented, accomplishment that we've never seen in the Super Bowl era. But the regular season, weeks 1 through 18, before we get to the playoffs, for me, this regular season has been defined by the Detroit Lions, by losing that NFC title game, knowing that the target was going to be on their backs, that they were the hunted team in the NFC, and really delivering on it even better than I think you could have expected, because 15 wins and needing every single one of them to get the bye week. I mean, that is a tall order, and they managed to pull it off despite the injuries, despite everything. Like I said, we'll see how this ages in the postseason, but right now it just feels like they've been the team of this year.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's one of those, when you think about head coaches and hires that'll come out in this cycle, again, the Lions could easily lose both their coordinators and lose Ben Johnson and lose Aaron Glenn to primo jobs. I mean, this is the model now. I think this is the team, the culture, even maybe more so than Andy Reid has with, multiple championships here, is the culture that Dan Campbell has in Detroit and the model that you want to emulate. It hasn't led to even a Super Bowl yet, but I think just the consistent winning in the last 2 years. And honestly, I mean, to watch Detroit this year, their point differential, I forget what it finished at now, but off the charts in terms of dominating teams, never taking their foot off the gas, putting up ridiculous offensive numbers. They're basically a touchdown a game better than they were last year. And they were good enough last year that everybody wanted Ben Johnson to be their head coach. So to get him back, to essentially get the same personnel back around him, this is why you do it, because that continuity lends to guys really being on the same page and playing at a high level.
To your point, the Lions' point differential finishes at plus 222, which is 60 points better than the next best team. That would be the Philadelphia Eagles. So you're 60 points better than the next most dominant team in the NFL. It's been that type of year, which, okay, let's look at what this means then in the big picture for both teams. And I think you make a really good point. I mean, you don't need me to tell you, the Lions win. They get the division title. They get the week off. This is a team that needs a bye week. They've got to be so excited to give guys a chance to rest. Alex Anzalone came back and made a very positive impact in this game. Maybe you can get some more guys healthy for the divisional round. But on top of that, it's going to be an interesting few weeks for the Lions because, like you just pointed out, everybody in this league is going to be trying to bite a piece of that culture. I think Aaron Glenn, if he wasn't already going to get phone calls about head coaching interviews, I think those calls are going to come after Sunday night. Obviously, we don't really need to spend a ton of time on Ben Johnson. This is going to be a very interesting 2 weeks for them as they try to navigate delivering on all of this potential from the regular season while knowing that they are the envy of the entire NFL.
Yeah, it's such a weird schedule now because it's like there's virtual interviews that I guess could start Wednesday and no in-person interviews until the 19th or the 20th. So I think we want all these things to shake out and jobs to get filled like tomorrow, as soon as they get done firing. And it's probably not going to be that case. Every team has to get Rooney compliant. And even the guys like Vrabel who can interview now and have interviewed now, it's hard to make them happen right away. So like you said, you can have these coordinators that are, getting ready for Super Bowl runs that also have to take calls and talk about their visions and line up potential staffs. It's got to be a difficult balance. These guys don't have a lot of free time in their weeks to begin with, let alone in the playoffs as they're trying to juggle both their present and their future at the same time.
We stopped viewing the Lions as a feel-good story a long time ago, but I do still like to just take a beat and think like, man, Lions fans thinking about those types of problems, like you would have killed for these problems at any other point in your life. So yeah, it's going to be a hectic month. There's a lot of pressure on this team, but good problems to have. Now on the other side of this, how's this for an eerie things come full circle, I guess, Greg, for better and for worse, because the Vikings' first loss of the season, they give up 31 points to the Detroit Lions. Then they turn around and have to go on the road to face the LA Rams. They lose that game, and they don't lose again until they give up 31 points to the Detroit Lions. So is history about to repeat itself? I just hope the Vikings can flush the disappointment of this loss. Because like I said, I think they were far closer to making a game of this than the final score indicates. And I hope there's no panic in that building as they head out here to start the wild card round against the Rams.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of those where I really thought they had the momentum down the stretch. And again, I keep counting on injuries to matter for the Lions when they clearly don't. But I really, like, with 3 weeks to go, I've been thinking Kevin O'Connell is the coach of the year right now, just because the job he's done, losing a quarterback before the season started, kind of shifting plans and having the success he's had. I wonder about Dan Quinn now. There's other guys you can talk about, but I think what they've done is remarkable. And I think if they bounce back, if they play well and they win in Los Angeles, they're still going to be a team that has a lot of confidence going into a rematch, even if it's back in Detroit. I think, like you said, I think a rematch is much likely to be a closer game, the kind of game we hope tonight would be. And that'll set up as maybe the best of the divisional games right now, even though there's other teams that can come into play and other storylines that'll shape just based off who wins this first weekend coming up.
It's a perfect underscore of how big this game was. Because even having watched this whole thing, I firmly believe the Vikings can make a run at a rematch with Detroit, at a potential conference championship game appearance. I think they're capable of all of that stuff, but it's so much easier said than done when you now have to go on the road to face Matthew Stafford and those Rams receivers. And oh, by the way, that young Rams defense has a lot of fun players on it. And they now have some very useful tape to watch of Sam Darnold struggling against the blitz. It's a tough league, man. It hurts to think that a 14-win team could be a one and done in the playoffs. But even as highly as I feel about the Vikings, I think you have to acknowledge that is the penalty for losing a game of this magnitude.
Right. I mean, this felt like a playoff game in terms of the implications, in terms of what it changes. It didn't eliminate one team, but I mean, it's a bye and then some. I mean, it makes your road. It's kind of like one of those double elimination tournaments where if you lose early, it's like you basically have to win an extra game and burn a couple pitchers just to get back out of the consolation bracket, it feels like. So, no, Minnesota's still right there. There's lots of teams that have either gone as well. I mean, Bucs won as a wild card a couple years ago. Giants won as a wild card. Packers were won as a wild card. There's wild cards that have won Super Bowls. It just takes 4 games instead of 3, and it takes some time on the road. They've done that at Minnesota. Again, 14-win team, but they're not going to scoff at anything they face here in the next couple of weeks. But again, they made their path harder by losing today.
Greg, you just made a College World Series analogy in this podcast,
right.
and that's why you're the best. That's why I love talking to you.
I'm
I'm sure we'll check in with you as the playoffs go along, man. I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
No problem. Thanks, Dave.
So we had to wait until late Sunday night to find out what it all meant, figure out who won the NFC North and what the wild card picture would look like. But while we waited, we had one last early slate to get through. And of course, why wouldn't we send it out in style with a banger of a chaotic final early window? That is the second item on our Sunday 6. And the chaos primarily unfolded in the NFC, which I'll take this opportunity to offer a mea culpa. My bad, NFL. My bad, schedule makers. I assumed we were in for a relatively low-key start to the Sunday because look at these lines. 3 NFC playoff contenders were favored by a touchdown or more. Bucs by 14.5 points, Commanders by 6.5, Packers by 10. Surely we're going through the motions. We're trying to get to the playoffs. Teams on losing teams. We're trying to get to the beach. Surely not too much drama to be had. Absolutely not. It all went haywire almost from the word go. At one point early on Sunday, every single game was going the opposite direction of the script, just like the NFL drew it up. You love to say any given Sunday, and sometimes it feels like a cliche until you're wrapped up in an early window like this. Let's start with the team that did ultimately clinch the NFC South. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers defeat the Saints 27-19. A score that looks relatively routine, and the game was anything but. And forgive me, Bucs fans, forgive me, Bucs players, but I spent most of the day imagining how this was all going to go wrong. Remember, the Falcons lost to the Commanders last week. They handed the lead in the NFC South back to Tampa. All you got to do is beat a Saints team that's not starting Derek Carr or Alvin Kamara or Chris Olave, and you get the home playoff game. There's a reason they were favored by 14.5 points. The Saints were playing Spencer Rattler. They've been ravaged by injury all year. All you got to do is win a home game against an injured team, and you're good. You're the NFC South champs for a 4th straight year. Piece of cake. Until midway through the first half, when those Spencer Rattler-led Saints had piled up 182 yards of offense and had scored 13 points. This looked like it was heading toward disaster. And I don't say disaster lightly, because it's one thing that the Bucs playoff hopes felt like they were going up in smoke, but also maybe this entire Tampa Bay regime was. We talked with Peter Schrager in the preview episode that Todd Bowles' job security never felt completely good, despite the number of times they've made the playoffs, despite the games that he's won. I firmly believe if Tampa Bay had lost this game, we could be talking about Todd Bowles being a somewhat surprising firing at the end of the season, despite finishing with a winning record. You lose on the last day of the season to cost yourself a division title, and maybe you get fired. That's all. That's what was all working through my mind. I saw it with crystal clarity. The Falcons can beat the Panthers at home, and the Bucs will be on the outside looking in. Then you take a breath, you give it some time, and things work out. Sure enough, the Bucs roared back from a 16-6 halftime deficit. They outscore the Saints 21-3 after halftime. And of course, having said all of those daydreams of doom that I was imagining, it all went the exact opposite. Not only did the Bucs yank back the lead from the Saints, but the Falcons outfailed the Bucs. Atlanta allowed 44 points to Carolina in an overtime loss. Bryce Young, probably the best day of his entire NFL career, 5 total touchdowns to sink the Atlanta Falcons. So even if the Bucs hadn't pulled this off, they would still be in the playoffs today. But of course, that's not what happens. The Bucs lead some late scoring drives. Baker Mayfield does his thing with a clutch scramble in the shadow of his own goalpost. Just like that, the nervy starts ends in absolute jubilation. And I do say jubilation if you watched Mike Evans' celebration after the game-clinching pass. And I do say game-clinching pass. Never before, maybe never again, will you see a victory formation scenario where instead of kneeling, the team throws an out to their best receiver, and it's not without reason. Mike Evans gets to 89 yards with the last play of this game to get to 1,000 yards on the season. He already had the 70 catches and 10 touchdowns that he needs. So Mike Evans, with that catch, earns $3 million extra, and I think more importantly, maintains his incredible streak of never finishing below 1,000 yards on the year. 11 straight years. Ties Jerry Rice. They're the only guys that have ever done it that many times. Only Jerry Rice has done it more times in his career, 14 total. Not the only guy that had a moment, obviously. The guy that got him that final football, Baker Mayfield, 2 touchdowns on the day. Like I mentioned, 68 rushing yards. His second straight NFC South title. Not bad for a guy who signed as an afterthought. And it was very fun to see him be Tom Brady's final LFG player of the game for the regular season.
Congratulations, Baker. Tell me about that last drive where you flipped the ball to Bucky Irving to kind of get the go-ahead touchdown, and not the go-ahead touchdown, but you sealed it with that one. Tell me about that play.
Yeah, honestly, we had drawn something up for Mike to get to over 1,000 yards at that point, and thought we were getting zero coverage, so we wanted to check the protection, get him a one-on-one chance, and just bad leverage on it, and they didn't end up blitzing it. So made a play. Bucky not having anybody blocking that extra protection, so he made a play, and he's a great player.
Yeah, I thought the play of the day was your scramble on the third down when you're backed up there in the fourth quarter and you ran for about 25 yards. Tremendous run. Your legs this year, I've seen you just so mobile and extending third downs. It's been awesome to watch you do that this year. Is that just more of a thought in your head when the plays are breaking down? How are you seeing yourself in those situations?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it starts with the protection. Those guys are protecting for days back there when I'm able to take off. And when they're dropping 8, playing some of this, obviously the situation, third and really long. So they're dropping out underneath and just having a few lanes and just trying to extend it, getting us into a chance to get the first down. And that's the mentality for us.
I'm very happy for you, for your team, getting into the playoffs. I know it's a quick turnaround here when playoff football happens. Your team is so resilient. Tell me about what you guys have been through and what it means for you to be in this situation with this team. It's a special group.
Yeah, I mean, this team's got the mental makeup to overcome anything. I mean, the amount of guys we've lost throughout this year, and I know everybody's got the same story throughout the league, but the guys that have stepped up throughout this year, the whole season, having to move for the hurricane, and just everybody adapting, adjusting on the fly. That's what great teams do. And so we've been battle tested, and all we wanted was a chance to get in this thing and see what happens. And now we'll take it 1 week at a time.
Yeah, you've done it. Congratulations to you. Really happy for you. Maybe we'll see you back here next week, but really tremendous season. Maybe we'll see you in the playoffs.
I appreciate it, Tom. Good to see you, man.
Every game that I broadcast, I award the LFG Player of the Game to that one player who makes me say, let's go.
I will leave it with this. We talked about Todd Bowles. He's wound up in people's crosshairs at times this year, mismanaging the situation with Mike and Chris Godwin at the end of the Ravens game, not playing for the win at the end of the Chiefs game. Todd Bowles, of all people, you would understand if he had knelt out the clock and gotten out of there with the NFC South title. I think it says a lot about what Mike Evans means to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers that they made sure to get him that damn ball. He finishes with 1,000 yards by the skin of his teeth. The Buccaneers win the division. They get the home game. They will be hosting the Washington Commanders on Wild Card Weekend. It's all so beautiful. It all started out looking so wrong. It's a testament to the grit of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers that they turned it around. So the Buccaneers were the only NFC team that clinched a playoff spot in Week 18, and we're very happy for them. But the number 3 item on our Sunday 6 is the rest of the playoff field, the rest of the seeding, which is what we were figuring out on Sunday. And oh boy, the NFC South madness was not the only thing going on, because while the playoff spots might have been determined, the way we got there was so wonderfully chaotic. Just a beautiful send-off to the craziness of the early window. You talk about the witching hour every week, and we got it as the games that decided the NFC's number 6 and 7 seeds both came down to the final 10 seconds of the game. Let's start with the Washington Commanders, who are officially the 6th seed. They needed either a win or the same result as the Green Bay Packers to hold on to that 6th seed. Safe to say they got it, although it did not seem that would be the case. They struggled with the feisty Dallas Cowboys at AT&T Stadium early. Nothing doing for the starters on offense. And it kind of felt like waving the white flag when Washington pulled Jaden Daniels at halftime. Hey, we did what we could. We're only willing to risk so much. I totally get that, by the way. But it doesn't feel like you're gunning for the best seed possible when you pull your starting quarterback at halftime. But I guess we forgot Washington has another number 2 overall pick who won the Heisman Trophy that they can turn to. And Marcus Mariota, my goodness, did he turn back the clock? The Commanders insert him at halftime, and he absolutely took over. Marcus Mariota, 15 of 18 for 161, 2 touchdowns, a casual 56 rushing yards, and a touchdown on the ground. And it all comes down to the final minute. Again, ping-ponging back and forth. Green Bay, Chicago, and Washington, Dallas, both going down to the wire. It matters. Washington, if they lose and Green Bay wins, they fall to the 7. Vice versa. If Washington wins and Green Bay loses, Washington, you get it. You're trying to avoid that number 7 seed. And I'm sorry if fans of these teams feel a type of way. but I don't think you want any part of the Philadelphia Eagles. So this felt very high stakes. And at the end of the day, Marcus Mariota, of all people, leads the Commanders down. A beautiful drive in the final moments. Terry McLaurin catches the go-ahead touchdown pass with 5 seconds to play. It's all very miraculous. And with this Washington team, they love to leave it to the last second. Do they not? What we didn't know at the time, it was a little unnecessary. Because while that was happening, the Chicago Bears were vanquishing their old foe. Yes, the Green Bay Packers, but also the clock. Caleb Williams mastering a last-second drive for the first time this season, moving the Bears into position for a walk-off field goal against Green Bay. Where have we heard that before? This time, they drill it. So as Washington is getting the win that we thought they needed, the Bears are delivering the loss that made it all irrelevant. But it's like I said to Adam Amin and Mark Sanchez afterward, who could have known that at the time? It does not take any credit away from how impressive it was to see the Commanders pull another one out of the fire. Well, y'all, Chicago beat Green Bay as Terry McLaurin was hauling in this touchdown. So I don't think anybody on the Commanders knew that they were safe, you know? And so with that in mind, with knowing that they didn't know, how impressive was that drive there at the end from Marcus Mariota and these guys to get the win at the buzzer?
I think it's impressive regardless. I think the fact that you have a backup quarterback like Marcus who can step in and not only play well when need be, but is there as a mentor and as a teacher with all these permutations that we see, the cross permutations between Mariota's career and Jaden Daniels' career.
And I think it's just a great example. There's two Heisman Trophy winners supporting each other, screaming at the top of their lungs, being the biggest cheerleader for the other player. And that's fun to watch. And then in the most crucial moments, 4th and 1, got to have it situation, you let Marcus Mariota do what he's done forever as a football player, and that's just zone read the end, and knife up the field. So well done by him, and that sideline just erupted here. That was fun to watch. This Washington team, they're a tight-knit group, you can tell.
It's such a fun finish, and it didn't look like it was gonna be. I mean, Jaden Daniels and the starters, they struggled in the first half. It looked like this might be a loss right up into the end. Do you think there's an emotional carryover when you get a win like this? And, you know, maybe they would say they don't care, but they do get to avoid the Philadelphia Eagles now. I personally think that matters. I don't know. Do you think there's carryover here?
Well, I think the biggest carryover is the 75 plays that defense had to be out there on the field. So regardless of the emotional carryover, that hangover, if you will, from, you know, Dan Quinn playing against his former team in their building, those are huge things for this team. And, you know, when you can accomplish those things, it's something. Now, they just got to get some rest.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. I will say, though, Mark made a great point in the moment after that play. Kingsbury's going nuts. Remember, he's coaching for a head coaching job. He also wants to be back out there in position to be running a franchise. McLaurin was looking for that record. He got it at the very last moment. And Mark said something that I thought was very accurate. That's the body language you'd like to see when the final seconds of the season, of the regular season, tick away. And I think that's got to be a great feeling for Washington. You take the big picture view of it, too, 30,000 feet. It's a franchise that hasn't been where it was in the 1990s, hasn't really had this level of success for maybe a decade plus, just snuck into the playoffs 4 years ago. This was a much different-looking Washington team this season, and I think it's going to be a fun group to watch come playoff time.
They're on the right track. You want to crescendo into the playoffs. It's so important to have that momentum. This team's going to be a tough out.
With all the late game theatrics we've seen from the Commanders this year, maybe we should have expected this all along. But
sure.
Incredibly fun. Guys, always fun chopping it up with y'all. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Hey, Dave.
I got to take a moment to shout out the job that's been done in Washington this year. I mean, we've talked about it all year, but finding a way to win this game gets the Commanders to 12 wins. Less than a calendar year after Dan Quinn was hired. 11 months ago, he's hired to take over a 4-13 team, complete overhaul. General manager Adam Peters comes in. Jaden Daniels is the draft pick. Can they make it work with a leaky offensive line and a cast of senior citizen NFL players? They are a 12-win team. Absolutely remarkable job. we talked about it earlier this season. I don't know if it's enough for Dan Quinn to win Coach of the Year when you're going against the likes of Kevin O'Connell, Dan Campbell, Sean Payton, Jim Harbaugh, but we are absolutely going to make sure he gets his shout out for one of the more incredible turnaround stories we've seen in recent years. And with that, it's the Commanders going to face the Buccaneers, which fun little synergy here. A rematch of the season opener. Tampa Bay handed it to Washington in week 1 in Tampa. They play again the Sunday night game, wild card weekend. I don't think anybody saw this as a playoff preview back in week 1. And I'm going to step out on a limb and say it won't be so easy this time for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And it's not the only week 1 rematch, because that Green Bay loss, look, kudos to Caleb Williams. They get their first win at Lambeau Field since 2015, their first win against Green Bay, period, since 2018. No, it was a bad season for the Bears, but don't try to tell me that doesn't matter. Huge moment for Caleb Williams at Lambeau Field. And now the Packers rematch the Philadelphia Eagles. That is the late window game on Sunday, 1:30 out here on the West Coast, 4:30 Eastern at the Link, a rematch of the Sao Paulo game from week 1, that Friday night game. Hopefully the field is in better shape this time around for that rematch. What a fantastic NFC slate. But without even trying to focus on the loss, Green Bay will enter this week with much different questions, namely health. Jordan Love banged up his throwing arm in this game. Christian Watson also left. Very important storylines heading into the playoffs. Had a chance to catch up about that, as well as Chicago finally delivering in a big moment. Surprisingly fun game at Lambeau. Had a chance to talk to Moose Johnston and Kevin Kugler about it. Guys, I don't think you could script it any better. I mean, not just to win on a walk-off after what happened at Soldier Field, but the Bears got there with some very good clock management for a change. I mean, how encouraging does this have to be for this young Chicago team to pull that off?
Well, apparently all it took was for the calendar to turn to 2025, and all of the problems of 2024 went away at the end of the game.
Amazing for them to be as resilient as everything that's happened to them this year. They've lost so many times on the last play of the game. The Hail Mary in Washington against Green Bay at Soldier Field, Minnesota at Soldier Field. What happened on Thanksgiving Day against the Detroit Lions? And for this team to find the resiliency to win a game in that exact same fashion, when, truth be told, you're waiting for them to find a way to lose it again, and they finally break through. We talked about this before the game. When they do this, when they finally find a way to close a game and win, what happens to the psyche of this team? Whether it is 2025, and that's the reason why it happened, I'm excited to see what happens for the Bears organization in the offseason, as they're probably going to go through a lot of changes, but what Caleb Williams does in season 2.
It's a very encouraging way to wrap up for the Bears. For the Packers, a very intriguing situation there. Obviously, Jordan Love exits this game. It kind of looked like he was flirting with returning when it looked like seeding was on the line. Where do you put the Packers losing this game heading into the postseason? And I guess it's going to be all eyes on Jordan Love's hand moving into the playoffs.
Yeah, it's the concern with that elbow and that hand of Jordan Love after the injury in the second quarter, because you know you're going to Philadelphia, you're playing the Eagles. You want your quarterback healthy for that one.
Absolutely. Christian Watson, another guy that played today and got hurt on that same drive that Jordan Love did. And I think that the Packers have realized his value while he's been out of the lineup for the last couple of weeks. And you were hoping to have everybody healthy going into Philadelphia, if that's where you were going to be. And they're going to be going in with a lot of questions. And Matt LaFleur's big concern is, how much time do we have ready to get for this game anyways? Are we playing Saturday? Are we playing Sunday? Are we playing Monday? And now that you've got some injuries and you're going to try to do everything you possibly can to get the guys healthy, it's going to be a challenging week for Green Bay. It's going to be interesting to watch them in the playoffs.
Packers have the playoff trip to look forward to. Bears, they get the win, though, and it's their first win against the Packers since 2018. So everybody got a little something to feel good about coming out of this. Guys, it was a really fun one. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You got it.
Thank you.
With all of that absurdity out of the way, we could finally take a breath in the late window of the NFC games. Because look, Not a whole lot of drama. After Tampa Bay won, after the 6 and 7 seed were decided, you make the call whether you're invested in a Rams team starting Jimmy Garoppolo, clearly content to let the chips fall where they may, going against Seattle. It was basically a matter of whether the Rams would finish with the 3 or 4 seed. And shocker of shockers, Seattle playing to get to 10 wins, playing for pride, beats the Rams 30-25. The Rams fall to the 4 seed. Seattle out of the playoffs with a 10-7 record. Tough break for Geno Smith and the boys, but it's nice to have it helps offset the pain, the sting, to have a $6 million windfall. I shorted Geno Smith because, look, we knew going in 185 passing yards gets you a $2 million incentive. 10 wins gets you another $2 million incentive. But Geno Smith completed 74% of his passes against the Rams on Sunday, and that upped his completion percentage to kick in another $2 million incentive. So Geno Smith, making $12.7 million in salary for the season, gets an extra 6 with his performance here. Maybe doesn't make you feel any better about missing the playoffs, particularly if you're a Seahawks fan, but hey, maybe, Geno can kick in some extra holiday gifts for his teammates, maybe make the vacation that much nicer. Very impressive performance from him. I'm excited to see where the Seahawks go in Mike McDonald's first season, because they showed glimpses of having a higher ceiling than what we've seen from the Seahawks in the post-Russ era. Obviously not good enough to make the playoffs, but a team with an intriguing future in my opinion, but that will have to wait because the present is the playoffs and they are set. The Rams fall into the number 4 seed. So let's recap. The Detroit Lions, with their big win, take the week off as the number 1 seed. You've got the number 2 Eagles hosting the number 7 Packers in Philly, late afternoon, Sunday. Couldn't ask for a better scenario. You've got Tampa Bay as the 3, hosting Washington as the 6, Sunday night at Raymond James in Tampa. Beautiful. And of course, right out here in LA, the Vikings look to respond to their loss to Detroit with a trip to face the number 4 seed Rams. That will be the Monday night game. It's Super Wild Card weekend. We got to have a Monday night playoff game. Cannot wait to see Sean McVay going against Kevin O'Connell. The protege tries to become the master. All the great storylines you could think of. A loaded NFC schedule for the playoffs, and this is what it looks like. The NFC delivered plenty of drama in the early window, but the fourth item on our Sunday 6 is that the AFC did not hold up its end of the bargain. The league scheduled this very intentionally to put the Kansas City Chiefs and the Denver Broncos in the late window to extend the drama as much as possible. Cincinnati played on Saturday. Their fate's in the balance. Miami's fate is in the balance as the Chiefs play the Broncos. It's not even really worth getting into because, I don't know, 5 minutes of real time into this game in Denver, it was pretty obvious what was going to happen. The Denver Broncos cruise past the Chiefs by a score of 38-0 and secure themselves the number 7 seed in the AFC playoffs. Denver was up 14-0 10 minutes into the first quarter. They scored touchdowns on their first 3 possessions. They had an 18-play drive at one point in the first half. Just very, very quickly, whatever drama we thought we were setting up for evaporated into thin air. I had visions heading into this weekend of ping-ponging back and forth between Dolphins, Jets, and Broncos, Chiefs to see, oh my gosh, Carson Wentz just threw a touchdown and now it's only an 8-point game in Denver. This could happen. No, just spare me. Did not happen. Bo Nix completed his first 17 passes. He wound up throwing more touchdowns, 4, than incompletions, 3. Broncos put up 479 yards of offense. It's the worst loss of the Andy Reid era. The Broncos cruising into the playoffs in style. We'll get to their matchup in a minute, but it had to feel good with the way the last few weeks have gone for the Broncos. Remember, they lost on Saturday in overtime to Cincinnati. They really had to sweat this thing out after losing to the Chargers a few weeks ago. They weren't sweating for very long on Sunday. I doubt anybody in Kansas City is sweating any of this. I bet you, I'm sure you saw the reports of snowy conditions keeping the Chiefs on the ground in Kansas City for a few extra hours. I bet Chiefs fans would have been fine just forfeiting this game to the Broncos. They obviously already had the number 1 seed secure. They sat all of their core starters in this game. And now on top of that, they get an extra week to get healthy and to get rested for the divisional round. No sweat in KC. Had to be a little bit of a deflating evening in Cincinnati, if I had to guess. Like I said, it was all primed to be very fun and dramatic. The Bengals made it dramatic, as they often do on Saturday night. They did their part. However close it might have been, they snuck out of Pittsburgh with a 19-17 win. Not sure I saw Cade York being one of the heroes of the Bengals regular season finale, but he hit 4 field goals. They sneaked past Pittsburgh, and you know, I can just imagine Bengals fans, for that matter, Bengals coaches and players settling in on the couch with a Coke and a bag of chips, just hoping for the impossible. And I bet you the TVs in Cincinnati were shut off pretty quickly on Sunday evening. Cincinnati instead finishes 9-8, first team out of the playoffs for the second year in a row, but 2 wildly different circumstances. Last year, they lost Joe Burrow to the wrist injury in November. That Jake Browning led them within a game of the playoffs. This year, you had a healthy Joe. You had him for 17 weeks, MVP level football. He finishes with 4,900 passing yards, 43 touchdowns, and you missed the postseason. That's a tough pill to swallow. Burrow, according to our wonderful stats people here at Fox Sports, just the 3rd quarterback to throw 40 or more touchdown passes and miss the postseason. The only other guys to do that, 2012 Drew Brees with the Saints, and 1986 Dan Marino with the Miami Dolphins. I don't know. I could be wrong about this. Even though the Broncos are divisional rivals, maybe the Chiefs got some level of satisfaction out of making sure Cincinnati's season ended on Sunday. And also, Broncos Chiefs rendered Miami, New York completely irrelevant, which I'll just say it's a shame for Aaron Rodgers, because his season, after a very tumultuous, very bad one, it does end on a high note. It was the Dolphins that entered Sunday as the next team. We focus so much on Cincinnati, but the Dolphins would have had to lose too. And granted, they did, because it was the Jets who capped off their season with a 32-20 win. Like I said, this game became background noise about 10 minutes into Broncos Chiefs, but it does come as potentially, who knows for sure. We'll find out in January or February. Well, it is January. We'll find out in the coming weeks. That's what I'm trying to say. Whether this was the end of Aaron Rodgers' Hall of Fame career. Started very forgettably through a pick early, but Aaron Rodgers responds with 274 passing yards, 4 touchdowns on the day. His first 4 touchdown performance since the last time he won MVP back in 2021. And like I talked about with Joe Davis and Greg Olsen when we caught up after this game, we're going to talk about what the future holds for Aaron Rodgers. But right now, I was happy to see the guy play a really fun game to end his season, however disappointing it might have been. Well, guys, obviously, it's going to be nothing but speculation about Aaron Rodgers' future from here, and understandably so. But before we do that, just how nice was it, if this is the last time we get to see Aaron Rodgers, how nice was it to see him go out kind of on his own terms, playing the way that we were so familiar with for so long?
Yeah, I think a few things. The production, 4 touchdowns, the way that it looked, and then the smile on his face. He seemed to just be having a great time.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. I mean, and this wasn't against some like pushover team. This was a team in the Dolphins that, at least coming into the game, they're 8-8. They're playing for their playoff future, and they had one of the better defenses in football. We talked a lot about it at the top of the show. So to put together a 4-touchdown performance, have a smile on his face, run around, make plays off script, off rhythm, it's just so hard to believe that version of Aaron Rodgers, that's the end. I mean, if it is,
right,
more power to him, but there's football left in that arm, and there's football left in those feet. We saw that today.
You guys touched on it just there, and you touched on it during the broadcast plenty too. I mean, it's so interesting to think about. That version of Aaron Rodgers has a place in the NFL, but obviously he's 41 years old. He is a lightning rod type of player. He's going to bring a media circus with him wherever he goes. Do you guys think a performance like that will change minds around the league about whether or not they want to potentially bring him into their team next year?
I think more than this performance, the last month and a half or so, he's looked more like himself.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, on-field production and performance, I don't think there's anyone questioning that he's still capable of playing in the NFL. Now, is it at the MVP level? I think there's a lot of nuance and conversation surrounding that, especially in what would be year 2 coming off the Achilles and everything, he's told us about being healthier. But again, we talked about it during the broadcast. There's a fit element. Who's the head coach? Is there a strong personality in the room? Are they a roster that is built to win? Do they have ownership? There's so many different factors that go in to whether or not you just say, from a football perspective, there's a lot of teams Aaron Rodgers can fix. There's a lot of teams he could help. The question is, can you check all of the boxes? They couldn't check all the boxes here in New York, and that's why it ultimately failed. Is there a destination out there that can? That's the question that we'll see come this offseason.
Aaron told Pam Oliver just a minute ago he's not going to hold anybody up for a long time, so I'm interested to see what this timeline looks like for him. But like I said, just cool to see him playing at that level to finish off what was otherwise a disappointing season. Guys, Happy New Year. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
While Aaron Rodgers was possibly riding off into the sunset, the LA Chargers were finishing off a dominant win against the Las Vegas Raiders. They beat Vegas 34-20, and that, combined with a Steelers loss on Saturday night, gives them the 5 seed in the AFC playoffs, which means our number 5 item on the Sunday 6 is the finalized AFC playoff picture. We've been wondering about the order. We've been guessing, we've known the teams for a minute, but we finally have it all sorted out. You can see the nice, pretty graphic right here. It goes like this. Kansas City, undisputed in the number 1 seed with the week off. Number 2, the Buffalo Bills will now play the 7th seed Denver Broncos. In the 3 spot, you've got the Baltimore Ravens, who won the AFC North early on Saturday. And what do they get for their troubles? A rematch, a rubber match with the Pittsburgh Steelers, an all AFC North 3-6 game. And then, like I said, the number 4 seed AFC South champ Houston Texans will host the 11-6 Chargers in the 4-5 game. So let's just run through it. 3 really great matchups to get us started in the AFC. And I think it starts with the Broncos. You can't say sneaking in because they've been the favorite to get there, but really putting an exclamation point on their 7th seed and looking like a team that could threaten Josh Allen and the Bills. It's Denver's first playoff appearance since Peyton Manning and Von Miller won Super Bowl 50 all the way back in 2015. For the Bills, the 3rd straight year they have been the AFC's number 2 seed, the 4th overall during this remarkable McDermott-Allen era in Buffalo. Also want to throw in some notes about the matchups themselves. Just the 2nd ever playoff meeting between these two teams, which is surprising to me, at least, because there's such rich history here with both franchises. Just the 2nd time they've ever met in the postseason, the first one being the 1991 AFC title game, which the Bills won by a score of 10-7 in the 3-6 game. Who doesn't love settling things so neatly? Ravens won the most recent game against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh with that gritty 18-16 win a month and a half ago. Now we get to settle one of the best rivalries in football on the field. Pittsburgh going back to Baltimore for game number 3 in the series this year. Lamar Jackson gets glossed over because it was a Saturday game, but became the first player in league history with 4,000 passing yards and 800 or more rushing yards. Ravens ran away with it against the Browns, 35-10 to clinch their division in style. I've been saying it for weeks. I'm not going to make a case too far one way or the other for Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. I'm going to guess one of those guys is your NFL MVP for this season. But I said it heading into week 18, Lamar should not be written off before all the games have been played. And that's exactly why it puts another nice feather in his cap. Maybe this could be a co-MVP type of year. Maybe Josh and Lamar both equally deserving. That is another subplot that will get settled at the end of all this at NFL Honors. Meanwhile, the Steelers tried desperately to rinse that stench of losing off themselves. They played their starters. They knew that they were a long shot to win the division because Baltimore had a game on them. Played their starters anyway. Did not work out. They still lose to Cincinnati, and now they are just the third team in NFL history to enter the postseason on a losing streak of 4 or more games. That is not a fun distinction. The 86 Jets and the 99 Lions, the only other teams to do that. And spoiler alert, neither one of those teams made much of a run in the playoffs. It would be very surprising, very impressive if the Steelers managed to do that. This will be the 5th ever playoff matchup between Baltimore and Pittsburgh, which speaks to the success of these organizations. Felt like they played every year during the run of Ben Roethlisberger and Joe Flacco. Speaks to how successful these two franchises have been. Pittsburgh 3-1 in those games, most recent one happening in 2014. Like I said, each team won a game in the regular season. So get to decide the series with a trip to the divisional round on the line. Who doesn't love that? Lastly, the 4-5 game, Houston hosting the LA Chargers. Not a game that I think a lot of people are going to give a good amount of credence to, but I like this matchup a lot. Yes, it's been a struggle for the Texans in the back half of the year, but despite all of that, DeMeco Ryans and CJ Stroud guide Houston to their second consecutive 10-plus win season. That's only happened 5 times since 1950. That is an impressive accomplishment, and maybe a weird stat, but one that I like. Texans were founded in 2002. Every time they've won the division once in their history, they've gone back-to-back. This is the 4th time they've gone back-to-back as AFC South champions. Don't really know if that means anything, but I like it. I like a quirky stat. Chargers, here's a stat for you to know. They've allowed 20 points or fewer in all 9 of their road games this year. That Jesse Minter defense, yes, they had their struggles with the likes of Baltimore and the Cincinnati Bengals, but this Houston offense has struggled for a lot of the year. CJ Stroud has taken plenty of sacks. This is an LA defense that can make life very difficult on anyone, let alone a Houston offense that's had its fair share of problems. Chargers 6-3 on the road this year. I haven't looked at it. I don't know. I would not be surprised if the Chargers are favored in this game, or at the very least, it'll be a very small line. First playoff meeting between these two teams. And yeah, it doesn't have the headline sex appeal maybe of Baltimore, Pittsburgh, or the Bills going against the Broncos, but I guarantee you this will be a very competitive game down to the wire. Looking forward to that one. The last item on the Sunday Six is the one that promises to age the most poorly, and that is the coaching carousel, where things stand with coaching changes, head coaching vacancies, front office vacancies, all of the stuff that accompanies the end of a regular season. It has begun in earnest this year. The New England Patriots, within moments of their regular season concluding, ironically, a season that concluded with a win. They beat the Buffalo Bills 23-16. That improved them to just 4-13 though. And Gerard Mayo, but before the whole team was even out of the building, fired after 1 year as head coach of the New England Patriots. Very curious situation. Obviously, a coach of the stature of Bill Belichick is going to leave a large shadow. Anybody that followed him was going to struggle to replace it, but clearly a case where, despite Mayo being the tapped guy, the guy that was identified to continue the Patriot way, a guy who was a rising star, a former player for the Patriots, looked like a guy who was in over his head, not quite ready for all of the responsibility of being an NFL head coach. And a lot of that, in my opinion, just the stuff outside of the game of football, answering questions the right way, presenting a united front to the media, knowing how not to create news stories out of answers or non-answers or second guessing play calling, all of that good stuff. It was a bit of a circus by the end of the season in New England. I still think it's always jarring when a head coach is fired after one season, no matter how deserving it might be. And for an organization that was as stable as the Patriots were, it's very interesting to see Robert Kraft being willing to move on after just one season. And it does make you wonder what he might have his eye on to pull the trigger as quickly as he did. Because like I said, the Patriots were ready to go. And maybe New England winning this last game of the season had something to do with it, because it did take them out of the number 1 overall draft slot. Gerard Mayo's guys played their way out of the number 1 pick in the final afternoon of the season. Regardless, it felt like the Patriots already had a plan in mind, and I can't help but wonder if you do want the Patriot way but better, there is a former Patriot great out there on the head coaching market who recently interviewed with the New York Jets, guy by the name of Mike Vrabel, in case you're not picking up what I'm putting down. Mike Vrabel available. Maybe Robert Kraft has identified him as actually the former linebacker that we want to lead us into the post-Bill Belichick era. It won't be Gerard Mayo, at least not after his first year. That is the 4th head coaching vacancy. As of right now, it's the only new one. Obviously, Jets, Saints, Bears were all already open. We'll see what happens there. But the Patriots officially the 4th head coaching vacancy. Like I said, this is probably not going to age very well. I would guess by Monday, mid-morning, Monday afternoon, we will have a few more of those to talk about. We do know 2 that won't be happening. Sunday evening, Miami owner Stephen Ross put out a statement that head coach Mike McDaniel as well as general manager Chris Greer will both return next season. Not terribly surprising to me. The Dolphins did lose an ugly one to fall to 8-9 in New York, but this was a team that didn't have Tua Tagovailoa for a solid chunk of the season, battled a lot of injuries. Can't say that I feel great about where things are going, especially in the aftermath of that loss. You've got Tyreek Hill, who's been one of the faces of this turnaround under McDaniel, saying he wants out. He's too competitive to simply be out there, to not be part of the playoffs, basically. I doubt he regrets it because of the deal, but it's got to sting Tyreek Hill a little bit to see the Chiefs continue this run of amazing success post-trade. Regardless, we'll see if Tyreek Hill is actually out of the picture, but we know Mike McDaniel and Chris Greer not going anywhere. The other one also in the AFC, Jim Irsay, owner of the Indianapolis Colts, announcing that head coach Shane Steichen and general manager Chris Ballard will return next season. Steichen, even with some bad ups and downs this year, the Anthony Richardson drama, couple of inexcusable losses, that's still not terribly surprising. Steichen had the Colts within a first down of the playoffs last season. He's a hot commodity. I would say it's too early to give up on that. I'm sure Colts fans will have a lot to say about Chris Ballard returning another season without an AFC South title. Ballard's still looking for an answer to the quarterback position after Andrew Luck's retirement, and it has usually been very ugly. Anthony Richardson's first mostly full season as a starter being the latest in this saga. I wouldn't have been surprised if the Colts decided to move on from Ballard, but they have announced they will not be. So that does it for now. But like I said, I'm guessing we're not quite done. We will see what all happens with this. It's always a fluid situation as you wrap up a regular season, but fortunately, we'll have some help deciphering it all. It's a great time to tease a segment with our own NFL on Fox insider, Jay Glazer, who we will speak to Monday about all the latest happenings, what he's hearing about interviews, about hirings, about firings, what's the latest. Cannot wait for Jay to help us make sense of everything. So make sure you are tuned in for that on Tuesday. And we'll see you then, because it rolls on. The regular season is over. The NFL on Fox podcast isn't going anywhere. We've got Wild Card Weekend to get ready for. We've got a coaching carousel to decipher with Jay Glazer, among others. There's so much more content coming your way, and it starts Tuesday. We will be back in your feed then. Make sure you're subscribed if you're not. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcasts, you can find us there. It has been such a fun season with y'all. We love doing this, and guess what? We're not even close to being done. We will be with you all the way through the postseason and right up to Super Bowl 59. It's so close. You can almost taste it. Let's go. This is the fun part. We will talk to you soon. I appreciate it.